Ruchim Aboim b'Shem Hashem. Shem Egin Shir Torah. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from her of Yakov that Smith Shlita Machilas Basa Acha Achilas Gavina or Cholov, eating meat after dairy. Of the great Chus sponsor and shir call Egin Shir Torah at 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com.
We heard an interesting shaila was someone Erev Yom Tiv. He had decided to have pizza right before the Zman. Baruch Hashem, it wasn't Pesach, but he had, it was Sukkot, and then he chapped that he heard that you have to wait 6 hours if you have pizza that's made with hard cheese. How's he going to have a suda? He's embarrassed. He's going to have to sit by the suda and not have fleishiks. Is it true that after a hard cheese, pizza, that it might have hard cheese, you have to wait 6 hours? And then you have the simple shaila, a person comes home from work and if supper's not ready, he has a coffee, and he wants to go from a coffee right into a fleishig meal. Does he have to wait? Does he have to do anything? So today we're going to discuss, if you noticed, the sugya of eating meat, fleishiks after dairy, after milachiks, pizza, coffee. And of course the big sugya of hard cheeses, which taka requires 6 hours to wait in between that milk, that and fleishiks. So really, to get a clarity, we have to step back a moment. We are convinced that after you eat fleishiks, you have to wait 6 hours. And I say 6 hours, some wait 5.5, some wait 3 hours. When I say 6, that means your 6 hours, with respect to all minhagim. But we know that when you eat fleishiks, you have to wait 6 hours until you get milachiks. What's taka de pshat? Why do you have to wait b'chlal after fleishiks? We know the issa deraisa is only when you cooked meat and milk together. Okay, if you eat it together, even if it's not cooked, so it's an issa derabanan. But in our case, you ate fleishiks and you cleaned out your mouth. Why do you have to wait any amount of time? So obviously, what people might think, it mixes in my stomach, that's why you have to wait. So that's obviously not true. That's what we call a real boich svara. That's not mechayev anything. You don't have to wait because of a mix in the stomach. So where does the makar, what's the reason you have to wait? So the source for waiting after fleishiks is the Gemara in Chulin Kufay. And once we understand that, we can apply it to our sugya. Chulin Kufay, ochal basa, you ate meat, asa lechol gvina. After meat, you can't have cheese. So what's the reason? So Rashi explains from the basa moitzi shuman, meat by nature has a fattiness to it. Evidently, meat leaves a fatty residue, sort of like a film of meat in your mouth that remains. So now, when you eat your milk or cheese afterwards, you're going to be eating basa b'chalav together. The cheese that you ate together with the fatty residue in your mouth combined. Now you might wonder, and you might even ask, if I do that in the worst scenario, it's only this the rabbanan. It wasn't cooked together. So you make it a reason, a gzeira for the rabbanan, but that's typical to basa b'chalav. Chazal made many precautions, and at most it's only this the rabbanan. So this is reason number one, not to eat dairy after meat. We'll call it moishech tam. There's a mamash of fat in the mouth. The Rambam in the end of Perik Chavtes Amacholas Asuris, so you have to wait 6 hours. The Rambam has a different reason, and that is meat by nature has a very stringy texture. It strands. When you eat meat, almost always you'll find some meat remaining, strands of meat remaining between your teeth. So now we have the similar problem. You have meat between your teeth. Now you're going to eat milk or cheese. You're going to combine and make basa b'chalav. And again, it's only in issa d'rabbanan, it wasn't cooked together, but that's bad enough. And these two chashashes are found actually in the Paiskim. The Shulchan Aruch in Pei Tes Aleph says you have to wait between meat and milk, and you look at the Paiskim, they explain the main two reasons. Don't forget there's a special Gzeres HaKosav Abasa Oidenu Bein HaShinayim, meat remains, and that causes problems. Okay, now, Oy Bazoi, let us now apply it to our share today. Now we can deduce, let's say I had cheese, and I want to have meat right afterwards. L'chayra, I don't have to wait at all. Why should I have to wait? Because l'chayra cheese doesn't have a shamnu, doesn't have that fatty residue, and also cheese definitely doesn't have that stringy texture. So none of the reasons apply. So someone asked, what do you mean? Coffee has a very strong taste. I said, well, it's the coffee, not the milk. And besides, strong taste has nothing to do. We're talking about a fatty residue. Ice cream also has a strong taste, a delicious taste, but that doesn't affect the sugya. So now you understand the very next words of the Gemara. After the Gemara says that you have to wait, you can't eat cheese after meat. Right after that, the Gemara says, Aval gvina mutalechol basa. Achal gvina mutalechol basa. When you have cheese, you're allowed to have meat. If you have any doubts that you're allowed to eat meat right after cheese, the Gemara even asks, V'kama yisha bein gvina lebasa. How long do you have to wait? Loi klum, 0, efes. So now we see in the same Gemara, come on, the same line. You have to wait in between meat and cheese, but after cheese, you can eat meat right away. Why? Because none of the reasons apply. Now, it's not as simple as it sounds, because the Gemara in the end of Kuf Dalet Amid Beis seems to imply that you have to wash your hands after you eat milchiks before you start fleishiks. And Gemara says at night, well, you can't look at your hands, you have to wash your hands. By day, it's enough to inspect your hands and see there's no cheese on your hands. Now, what's pshat? Teretz is pashut. We're not worried about bein hashinayim or meishach tam, but there's a very logical problem. Because if you eat cheese with your hands, there might be some cheese remaining. Now, if you're that type of person that you eat cheese with your hands, and now you're eating masa, so you're going to eat the meat with your hands. So on your hands, you're going to have basa v'chalav. So therefore, the Gemara says that really by day, if you inspect your hands and it's clean, it's okay. At night, you have to wash your hands. And the Torah quotes Beinu Peretz that it's best to always wash your hands. Fine. So in between, when you have cheese, then you want to have meat. If you're being mahadrin, you'll wash your hands, and now your hands are clean. That's the mechaba in our sif. It's interesting that today's whole sugya is one sif in Shulchan Aruch. Siman Peites Sif Beis, the whole sif. But it's packed with yesodis. So you have to wash your hands between cheese and meat. Now, Lamaisa, the Gemara does add in Kufay 2 other things you have to do. That's called kinuach and hadacha. Basically, kinuach means you have to eat a food in between the cheese and the meat. Except don't eat flour, dates, or vegetables because they're very sticky. And that perpetuates the problem. If you eat dates, so the dates are going to stick in your mouth. Now, why do you have to have kinuach hadacha? So the reason is very plush. Let's imagine a person had a piece of cheesecake, and then he wants to have fleishiks. So cheesecakes, it doesn't have stringy texture. But there's some crumbs in your mouth. It doesn't wash down. So we're worried that when you eat meat, it's going to combine with the crumbs in your mouth. So you have 2 ways of getting rid of any remaining milchiks. First, called kinuach, eat a solid food, and preferably swoosh the food around so that loosens and that dislodges any cheese in your mouth. So a solid food, swoosh it around and swallow it. And that's called kinuach. Hadacha is rinsing. Very simple. After you eat a solid food, take a drink, and again, preferably swish it around in your mouth, and then you feel your mouth has been properly cleansed. So basically, you ate cheese, you don't have to wait at all. But the Gemara says you have to have pre-treatment, we'll call it. First of all, rechitza, washing your hands, and then kinuach and hadacha. Now, the Paiskim say really you can make hadacha first, but Dr. Tshuva says it's preferable to make kinuach and then hadacha. So this is all in Peites Siv Beis. Now, this is obviously something we could understand because enechanami, cheese not moishich tam, it's not stuck between the teeth, but there's some amash in your mouth. So now we have rechitza and kinuach and hadacha. Now, let me tell you how vital kinuach hadacha really is. And I'll tell you a davar nifla ma'od. Besides the fact that it's din Gemara, that when you have cheese, you have to make kinuach hadacha before you have meat, din Gemara and Shulchan Aruch, it's something very special to us particularly. Because there's a famous chazal, it's actually Yishalmi, the Shita in Bechayres Daf Vav Beis quotes it, that when the Barshtim wanted to give Klal Yisrael the Torah, the Malachim says, Tana hoit chal Shmayim, don't give the Yidden, give us, we deserve it when we're angels. So the Barshtim says, what, you can't get the Torah, you people ate bas, you Malachim, ate basu b'chalav. When they eat basu b'chalav? In Parash Vayera, Avram gave them chemba b'chalav and then baka. So the Steipler and Birchas Peretz, Parash Vayera, asks us a logical question. What happened by Avram? If Avram cooked meat and milk and gave it to them, so Avram was over, so he can't get the Torah either. Because we know the Issa Bas B'chalav is even like Savashal cooking. So Avram lost the Torah. Teretz is Chas V'sham, Avram wasn't over. He gave them milk, cheese, and meat. So then, the Malachim weren't over, because they didn't cook it, they didn't have a portable kitchen. They ate it maybe together, but they weren't over on a deraisa. So the Steipler says one teretz is the Malachim weren't people, they were angels. When they put it in the mouth, it got cooked. So it's interesting, he says, I always had a problem. If it got cooked, it probably got burnt. If it gets burnt, so it's not bishul. So he says it's derech bishul. Okay, they put it in their mouth, and it got cooked. You know, it's the famous, I hope it's a joke, but they say, you know, some people, when they get excited, they like to burn these big dumpsters to make a protest. So the frumma, that want to stop the frumma from burning, they say, if you burn the garbage dumpsters, you also oivan basa b'chalav, because it's inevitable that someone threw cheese in the garbage and someone threw meat, and you're cooking basa b'chalav. So the frumma kanoi says, no, it's not bishul, it's burning. Burning is not bishul. So, you know, it's interesting that is it really derech bishul, but the Steipler assumes it's derech bishul. Now then he says a second teretz, and he says that the whole kasha doesn't begin, because merely being oivan issa d'Rabbanan is bad enough to lose the Torah. Now I thought he meant to say that Enochanami, Avram gave them separate, and they ate it together. That's the Rabbanan. But then he adds, the problem was that the Malachim ate it zeh chazeh, but they didn't make a chitza in between. So for a chitza, a lack of a chitza, they lost the Torah. Then I found the Chsam Sofer, tak on the same pasuk, he says even more beautiful. And he says, Avram gave them, look at the Seder, first he gave them takachema v'chalav, and then baka. How do they make kinuach v'hadacha? Chsam Sofer. True, Avram wanted to give them bread, but Sarah became Tameya. They didn't have any bread. So it comes out that the Malachim ate taka first cheese and then meat. But they didn't have kinuach, and that's why they lost the Torah. So both the Steipler and the Chsam Sofer are telling us that we was zeicha to the Torah because we made the precautions of either a chitza, like the Steipler, or kinuach v'hadacha, like the Chsam Sofer. So let's not be mezalzel in these dinei d'Rabbanan. In fact, the Toras Chayim, the original Toras Chayim, and Bav Metzia Pei Vav and Chulam Pei Zayin, he says that's why the minhag Yisrael is every Shavuos we have some type of a milach, either suda or kiddush, because we want to be zoicha every year to a new Kabbalah Torah. So we have to recreate a zehirus. So we have milachiks and then fleishiks, and of course we do it right. We'll soon see how to do it right, but we want to recreate the same situation and be zoicha to the Torah. So Lamaisa, let's be very clear. Midina Gemara, you don't have to wait between cheese and meat. Midina Gemara, you have to have rechitza, kinuach, and adach. I should mention for those that have braces or bite plates, I didn't find this in earlier poiskim, but I saw the Kafachaim in Pei Tes, near Deya Mem Tes, says if someone has cavities, has holes in his teeth, make sure to check in the holes of your teeth. So I guess today we have fillings, but we do have cavities. We do have braces, so make sure there's no cheese stuck in the braces. The Yam Shashloim and Chul and Ches Vav also says that anything that's stuck in between teeth has to be removed before you eat meat. Now let's apply this more specifically, okay? Imagine a person comes home from work and supper's not ready, so he has a cup of coffee or a cup of milk. Now he wants to have a fleishig meal. So if he's going to wash for bread, so then he has rechitza. And the bread will be the kinuach. And then he'll take a drink. So he was yaitzu all shitas. But who washes today during the week? Let's say he drank a cup of coffee, and from the coffee right into the meat. Nothing in between. He's oivan din gemar, right? Even though you're allowed to have it right away, but he did make rechitza, kinuach, and adocha. The only shaila is there any special heta for a drink, like coffee with milk, or a cup of milk mamish? So listen to an interesting yesod. The Rishash in Chul and Kuv Gimel Amid Beis discusses a person that eats milchiks with a cutlery, not with his hands. So he quotes the Pri Chadash that if someone eats with cutlery, with silverware, he doesn't have to wash his hands because his hands are clean. Okay, we would have thought like plug, or maybe he will touch, but Pri Chadash said you don't have to wash your hands if you ate with silverware. Then he adds the Rishash on his own, nearly, when do you have to have rechitza or and kinuach and adocha? When do you have to have what we call the full treatment if you ate cheese? But let's say you only drank milk, a cup of milk. There's no reason to make rechitza because you're using a cup, you're not using your hands, and kinuach adocha is unnecessary. Now maybe you would have to take a little rinsing, make sure there's no milk in your mouth. But the Rishash and the Darkei Tshuva and Tzidkot and Lamed Aleph quotes his lalacha that after milk you don't need rechitza or kinuach v'adocha. Very, very common. Person that had milk, he'd go straight into the meat. Now I would like to read for you a Rambam, but listen and tell me what you think, if the Rambam is a kasha on the Rishash, or maybe a raya. Okay? Rambam is Mechos Asuras Perek Tes Halacha Chavav. Mi she'achal gevina oy chalav tchila, either he ate cheese or milk, mutar lechel achar basa miyad. No problem. Because like the Gemara says, you're allowed to go from milk to meat. But Zok the Rambam, like the Gemara, b'tzarach sheyadiach yadav yakaneach piv bein hagvina u bein habasa. You have to make kinuach hadacha before you go from the milchiks to the fleishiks. Zok the Divrei Malkiel in Chelikei Mem Zayin, he quotes Ksas Achronim. He's referring to obviously the Rishash. The Rambam says beferish, if you ate cheese or milk, it's mutter, but you have to make a ruach v'adacha. So he says, those Achronim, the Rishash, forgot the Rambam. The Rambam says beferish that this halach is going on Gevina and Cholav. Oh, you masker? I don't think so. Let's look again. The Rambam says when you ate Gevina or Cholav, you're allowed to go into meat right away. But he says you have to be madiach between the Gevina and the meat, and left out the word chalav. Tainet Yechavadas, Gimel Nun Ches and Hagor, L'shoni Azov of the Rambam that left out chalav is a raya to the Rishash, not a kasha on the Rishash, because the Rambam left out chalav regarding kinuach and adoch. He does it. You have to be shaitiv, piv, yafa, get any milk residue out of your mouth. But we have a good case to say that there's no reason to make kinuach and adocha after milk. Avram gave the guests not just milk; he gave them chela. Now the Maisa, I could understand the Divrei Malkiel, because first of all, maybe the Rambam held it's the same thing throughout, but more so, there's always a typical loy plug. You can't make exceptions. This is mutter, this is not mutter. The Maisa, we could say that I think the Welt is takamachim even after milk, but certainly there's a tzad lahakol, maybe loy plug, or maybe bechlal. We don't make any differences, but hamekel after milk to go right into meat, just with a minimal hadachas piv is enough. Now, using cutlery, that already we saw the pichadash is mekel, and sivkat and tes. However, many poskim can question that. The Pischei Tshuva, sivkat and dal, the Darkei Tshuva, the Kaf HaChaim, Chagura Shmuel, the Chidon, Shurei Bracha, and I think there are two svars. First of all, by plug, you're eating cheese. How could you go right into meat? Also, Lamaisa, even if you have a fork occasionally, you touch the food with your hands. So you might touch the cheese and touch the meat. So l'maisa halacha, although the pichadash was mekel, I think this is even harder to be mekel than milk, because here typically a person does touch the food. Now, l'maisa, I'll ask you a question that you might not realize is a good question. Let's say I had cheese, mamish. I ate with my hands, let's say. And then I want to eat chicken. Do I have to make kinuach and adacha? So one thing, what's the shaila? I mean, I know chicken is not a deraisa like basa, but it's still cheese and then meat. But if you look at kamat beferish in the Gemara in Chulun Kuvdalar Amid Beis, oiv ugvina necholan bafikoirin, you're allowed to eat it behefka. Beloy netilas yadayim uveloy kinuach hadacha, as the Gemara explains. And the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch and Sif Beis quotes this, that the entire din of kinuach hadacha is only if you're eating meat. Chicken, there's no din of kinuach hadacha. Obviously, it's only d'rabbanan at most. You can be more mekel. But it's interesting, the later poiskim, the Arachayim HaKadosh and the Pitoyar, the Yad Yehuda, the Ben Ish Chai, the Kaf HaChaim all say that, of course, they're not arguing on the Gemara, but if you look at the Ramah in Siv Gimel, it's Kemat Mefurish that he wasn't making like this. Maybe the Gemara is not Maskana. But Lamaisa, I think the minhag is taka like the Mashmois of the Ramah, that if you had cheese and then you want to have meat, even chicken, you should make the necessary kinuach and adacha. Next question, next group of questions is, let's say you made the full treatment. You ate cheese and you made rechitza and you made kinuach and you made hadacha. Can you eat fleishiks right away? A minute later, you ate cheese, you made kinuach, you made rechitza, kinuach, hadacha, right into the fleish. So people have this notion you have to wait. Where's that coming from? It's not in the Gemara. The Makar is a Zoya in Parshas Mishpatim, the Beis Yosef and Archaim, Kuf Ayin Gimel quotes it. Zok the Zoya, a person should not eat milchiks and fleishiks b'shaita chada, in 1 hour, or b'sudas chada. And he goes on to say a sakana is involved when someone eats meat and cheese in the same shaita or the same suda. Now, Lamaisa, I don't know, in the Asik Minister, probably it's the old Yisai that milk is white, that's midas hachesed, basa is blood, midas hadin. You can't mix the two. That's probably the hezbollah, but whatever the hezbollah is, the Zoya says not to eat cheese and then meat in the same hour, same suda. Now someone's wondering, what is the Zoya arguing the Gemara? Not arguing, the Zoya before the Gemara. The Zoya was a Tanab, Shem Bayechoy. Gemara is not right. The Zoya may be held in the halachos mutter, but the sakana. So Lamaisa, it's not a kasha, how could the Zoya argue the Gemara? But Lamaisa, what's interesting is, the Zoya is the basis of halacha that perhaps we don't realize is very negeya to all of us. The Gemara, as we said, in the same sugi in Chulin, says after meat, you can't eat cheese. How long do you have to wait, mi'ikad din, after you eat meat to have cheese? So we know some have 6 hours, 5.5, 3. You look in the Ramah, in our Sif, Simon Peita, Sif Aleph, which is about meat and then cheese, minhag pashat b'medinas elu, to wait 1 hour after meat. Okay, at the end, the Ramah says, but Dagdim wait 6, but the Ramah mitzad halacha holds that the ikadin, all you have to wait after meat is 1 hour. Why 1 hour? Zok the Goyin, it's based on the Zoya. In other words, the real ikadin, even after meat, is based on the Zoya. So we take a machma, 6 hours, or 5.5, or 3, but ikadin is the Zoya. Now, Lamaisa, that's a different sugya. Our sugya of today is very much the Zoya. Because enochanami, after cheese, you'll have to eat meat right away, mitzad adin, kinuach hadacha, and mechitza, and you're fine. But we have the Zoya not to have it in the same hour or the same suda. The Zoya does not differentiate meat or chicken. And more so, the Zoya, as we'll soon see, does not differentiate hard cheese, soft cheese, milk. It's don't mix milk and meat in the same hour or same suda. Now, the Beis Yosef in Orachayim Kufay and Gimel, he says that Lamaisa, we should be choishes for this, and those that are Mekel, because they didn't see the Zoya. Now, this historically is well known, that the Zoya was not available till much later in history. The Rambam, they said, never saw the Zoya. So those that were Mekel, they said, well, Mitzara didn't, they're right, the Gemara. But the Beis Yosef throws in this point that had they seen it, they might have been machmeh as well. Now, Lamaisa, you have to realize that it's, in a certain sense, it's not an Issa Mitzad Halacha, but it's the Zoya. But Mitzad Hasheni, the Zoya includes even chicken and even milk, lav dafka hot cheese. Now, Lamaisa, this is the Zoya. The Gemara clearly did not worry about this. How do we paskin? So that's a good question. The Ramah in Peites, our Siv Beis, after the Mechaber says you make Kinuach Adacha Rechitzi, you're okay. The Yesh Machmir Afilu B'Basach HaGevina. Some are Machmir, you can't have meat after cheese. Where is this coming from? Is Ramah Agman the Gemara? Zot the Goyin, Biurai, the Ramah is being choishish for the Zoya. So Taka the Mechaber, and this is to me a little strange, I couldn't figure it out. Maybe there's a Hezbollah, but the Mechaber in two places, by Yossi Peites near Day and Kufay and Gimel, does not quote the Zoya. The Beis Yosef in Kufay and Gimel and Peites, Kufay and Gimel Archaim, in Beis Yosef quotes the Zoya, but not in Shulchan Aruch, not in Peites, and not in Archaim Kufay and Gimel. But the Ramah does quote the Zoya. And the way the Goyen learns that the Ramah is choishish for the Zoya. Besides Kinuach and Adach, you have to have an hour of a wait. The Levush, both in Archaim and Yerdeya, said had the other Paiskim seen the Zoya, they would also quote it. So Lamaisa, the Beis Yosef writes Toiv and Acha in Lahachmir, but he doesn't quote it in Shulchan Aruch, but the Ramah definitely does. Now, Lamaisa, I want to tell you, just in case you're not choishish for the Zoya, the Magen Avram and Tov Tzadik Dalet, and Kuf Tzadik Vav, the Mishnah Berurah in Tov Tzadik Dalet and Kuf Tzadik Vav, and the Aruch HaShulchan and Sif Kat and Tes, the Chachmas Adam, are all not choishish for the Zoya. So, Bali Halacha are divided if you have to be choishish for the Zoya. Now, the only chiddush to me is those that are choishish for the Zoya, Doik V'Tishka, you'll see they have a minhag that after cheese they wait a half hour. The Zoya says Shai Techada. So the emes is the Pri Chadash and the Yad Yehuda and Kafachayim, all Gedolei HaPaiskim say, wait an hour. If you're waiting, do it right. Shai Techada. However, I think many suffice with a half hour. The Marshag in Yeridei and the Tshuva Simon Yud Gimel, he says the Zoya didn't mean an hour. I think what he means to say is the Zoya meant a unit of time. And we find in halacha that a half hour is considered a shaita. Like mincha, before mincha, and I'll do certain things. But Lamaisa, the Paiskim say either it's an approximation or it's just a unit of time. I saw the Mekadesh Yisrael and Shavuos Ayinei has a long arichas to show how many Paiskim taka say that lav dafka an hour, more than a half hour is also enough. Okay, so Lamaisa the Zoya is either an hour or a half hour, or those that are not makbid because the Mechaber does not quote it. Lamaisa, there's a different halacha Lamaisa that I think is important to mention. And that is, imagine a person had a cup of milk, and then he wants to have fleishiks. And I'm talking that he made rechitza, kinuach, and adocha. Now, does he have to? And he even waited a half hour. Okay, he's a very firm person. He covered all bases. But the problem is, he drank a cup of milk. And let's talk about milk, not coffee. I'll explain you why. Because when a person drinks coffee, it's a self if he has to make a bracha achreina. He drank it too slow, it's hot. He drank a cup of milk, he's zichach chayv in a bracha achreina. Now he makes kinuach and adocha, and rechitza, he's really from, even though some say you don't have to, goes into the fleishig meal. If he doesn't make a bar nefashis on the milk, where's the bar nefashis? He'll make a bar nefashis on the meat, and they'll pot the milk. So now we have a different problem based on the other half of the Zoya. The Zoya said not to have b'shaita chada or b'suda chada. If you're going to combine the milk with the meat, varaya, you don't make a barnafashas on the milk, so then it's suda chada. So that's why the Pri Megadim in Sif Seidas, Sif Katan Vav and Tezayin says, like the Zoya, if you're chayish for the Zoya, you have to make a barnafashas on the milk, and only then start the meat. Because if not, you have suda chada, even if you wait a half hour. The Shla in Shavuos in their mitzvah hey regarding the minhag of Shavuos, that some make a milchik a kiddush, and then they have a fleishik a suda by day. So the Shla very nice, but you got to make it an al michya, whatever it is in between, because you can't have suda chada. Now, this is based on the Zoya. So waiting is only half of the story. Waiting and making a bracha achreina. Now you're wondering, isn't this a goyim bracha she'ina צריכה? Because let's say I have a cup of soda, and then I have my fleishig meal. I can't make a barnafashas on the soda. I'll make a shackle on the meat, finish my supper, and make a barnafashas on the soda as well. So why, when it comes to milk, do you make a barnafashas? Why is that a goyim bracha she'ina צריכה? And more so, if you make a barnafashas on the milk, you're going to have to make another shackle on the meat, which you didn't need. The teretz is very pashut. If you are chayish for the Zoya, you can't do it b'suda chada. So you have to make a barnafashas. You know what it's like? It's like Yom Tiv Shechal b'Shabbos, and you want to have a suda shlishis. So there, Grada, we're a step ahead. We bench, we have a break, we go learn, have a minhag, and then we have a suda shlishis. So in this case, it's certainly better to make a barnafashas on the milk, then have a little of a break, go learn, you don't have to have mincha, but go learn, whatever, come back, and then make a fleishik, then start the fleishik meal, and make new brachas. But I must say, some are not even chayish to making a break. If you have to do it because of the Zoya, you can't eat it together. So you make a barnafashas, and then you start the meat. But it's certainly better to make a hefsek. I'll tell you why. Because late those are not chayish with the Zoya, so your chumrah is turning into a kula. Now, I tell you which is interesting. If you remember, this happened not so long ago. Asara B'Tevis came out on Erev Shabbos. So we were fasting into Shabbos. People came home, they made kiddush. They can't start a fleishig meal without their coffee. So many people made kiddush, drank a coffee, and then they had their fleishig suda. Or typically, a person had a coffee and then he has a suda. So I saw Rav Sternbuch in the Tshuvas Chelik Zayin Kuf Gimel the Oznidbru and Dalem and Beis says a chiddush, and they say in that case you don't have to make a bracha on the coffee. Why? Even if you drank it quickly. Why? So it's a nice chap. Let's reanalyze what you did. You came home, you made kiddush and drank a coffee. Then you washed the tilas yodayim. So maybe the washing on the bread makes it into a separate suda. The kiddush, coffee was one suda, and now you're washing is another side of the suda. So that when the tilas yodayim makes it into a second suda. So you could eat, you could go start to do without making a bracha on the coffee. Now this is a little bit chiddush to me because lamaisa you need the kiddush b'makom suda. How do you separate the kiddush from the suda? But apparently he felt that as long as you have a washing, that makes enough of a suda chada. See here it's not a vart, you have to make two different velten. You have to have two different worlds. The ikis don't make it suda chada. Where it's negeya more is Shavuos, and there taka, many people have the milchik kiddush, they make a bracha achreina, they learn, then they wash. But if you want to go with that svara, maybe you can say the same svara. That if you're washing, you're separating the milchik kiddush from the fleishik suda. Now lemaisa, this is all because the chayish of the zoya. So you have to make knuach handacha mitzad gedina gemara, and you have to make a different suda, and waiting a half hour al zoya. Now lemaisa, this is the shita of the zoya, and those that follow the zoya. If you look at, I told you, the Magen Avram and the Mishnah Berurah in Hilchos Shavuos, the Magen Avram and the Mishnah Berurah quotes his halacha. You don't need a bracha achreina in between, benching, whatever. You kenuach and adacha, then you go straight to the fleishik suda, and this is, we see that Magen Avram and the Mishnah Berurah were not chayish for the zoya. The Chachmas Adam in Mem Yud Beis also says you don't need any bracha in between. He's not chayiv for the zayah. Kinuach and adacha is non-negotiable. It's a Gemara. And the Aruch HaShulchan and Sif Tes a little more elaborate. He says yesh medagdegim to make a bracha achrayna because of the zayah, but aval rubam ein izarim bazeh. So if you never heard of this minhag of waiting a half hour and making bracha achrayna, you're probably part of the rubim that are not nizarim. But those that are makbid, it's based on the zayah's kepeda. Now, regarding Shavuos, particularly, I would just mention it's important to do things right. Because let's not forget, we got the Torah because we were careful in Kinuach and Adacha. And like Taras Chaim, we eat the Melechik's dafka to recreate our schus. So it'd be pretty counterproductive to eat cheese and do it wrongly. So whatever you do, make sure you do the halacha at least. You want to be the halacha without the zayah, that's an option, but not just to do what you want. If you have a melechik, a kiddush, less man de polig, before you start the fleishik suda, you have to make kinuach and adacha and rechitza. Now, again, if you tell me, well, I wash my hands for the challah, and I have a farshpais, and I have a drink, okay. But don't have melechiks and then fleishik without minimally dina gemara or rechitza, kinuach and adacha. Now, a coffee and then meat, again, we had earlier, that's a little more of a tzad to be makel, because even milk and meat, afterwards, we have a rishash. So, now what someone asked me, a good ha'or, he drank coffee and he wants to have straight fleishiks, not Shavuos, on a Tuesday night. But he drinks coffee very slowly. His minhag like the Mr. Brewer not to make a bracha achrayna. So, he can't make a bracha achrayna. How is he yotze the chumrah of Sudas Echad? So I said, I hear your question, but I'll tell you what a marsham. In Chelik Gimel Kuf Chavav, someone asked the marsham that he's always makbid, like the zayah, to make a bracha achrayna. Once he forgot. So he's in the middle of the fleishig meal, and he didn't make a bracha achrayna. Should he make a bracha achrayna right then and there? So marsham said, no. That's bracha צריכה, but he started. And also, the ik is you wanted it to be separate. So you forgot, okay. The bracha achrayna is just an indication you want it to be separate. So once you want it to be separate, but you forgot to make the bracha achrayna, it's good enough. I told this person, maybe that's the svar here also. You would make a bracha achrayna on the coffee, but you drank it too slowly. So you make a definite siluk, whatever you want to do, I don't know if you say nusach, whatever, or just, this is separate, now I'm going to have fleishiks as a separate suda, and you're not covering the coffee with the bracha achrayna on the fleishiks, because you don't need a bracha achrayna on the coffee. So basically, it is sort of a automatic siluk, and hopefully that's enough. Now, lamaisa, this is the yesod that we mentioned, and again, I did see some that are makel regarding coffee bichlal, as we said earlier. Some say you don't need kinuach and adachim, so coffee is a little bit easier of a shayla. Now, lamaisa, some paiskim say a big chiddush, talking about the shoyl in the Sambas Chayim, Reish Pehei, the Oznidbru and Chelik Dalad and Beis, Rav Sternbach and Beis and Sadik all say this. Could be the zoya, the whole peit of the zoya is only cheese, hard or soft cheese. Maybe milk, the zoya's peit does not exist. Now, this is hard to accept because, Eiman or Esek bin Historis. But don't forget, Midin Torah, Leisavashel Gedi, Bechalevi. It doesn't say cheese. There's no real difference, cheese or milk. So if the zoya is marked but not to have chalav and basa in the same suda, why should you say it's only gevina and then chalav? Lamaisa the kafachayim and peites yud and archayim kufay and gimel beis. He says mashma b'divrei hazoya. I think it means to say like I said. It's mashma. There's no difference if you ate cheese, milk, or anything, any dairy product. Don't eat meat afterwards unless you make the necessary half hour and different suda. Now, let me tell you another interesting halacha, which might mitigate to all of us. But I asked this in yeshiva. I said, let's say in yeshiva, when do you finish breakfast? So, Balabatim finish breakfast much earlier than yeshiva bachim, because they daven later, but they finish, let's say, 9 o'clock. I said, today you had lunch, right? Tuesday they have fleishik lunch. When did you have fleishiks? 1:45. How many bachim made kinuach hadacha in between breakfast, which is melechiks, and lunch, which is fleishiks? And no one could say I did. No one made kinuach and adacha. What happened? The one thing the Gemara says, l'chol hadeyos, is after milk you have to make kinuach adacha. Where's your kinuach adacha? So they don't know. Many of them never heard of kinuach adacha in the first place. But where's kinuach adacha? So again, if they washed for lunch and they had bread and they had a farshbais or they had bread and drink, no. But who washes today during the week, and especially in yeshiva, it's just almost not negayah. So here we could suggest something, which is the chiddush. Maybe the whole kinuach and adacha is if you have milchiks and then fleishiks right away. But let's say you have at least an hour in between, which like the zoya is enough even for fleishik to milchiks. So maybe then you could say after an hour wait, whatever's in your mouth was loosened and swallowed. In other words, maybe the whole kinuach and adacha is right away. But after an hour wait, so we'll make sort of like a bimkoim kinuach and adacha. And who says this? I saw Rabbi Yakov Kamenetsky in the Embassy Yakov Yedei, RS 37, that basically says if you have an hour or more, then you don't need kinuach and adacha. Now, Lamaisa, the Paiskim say, if it's just a half hour, who said that's enough? Even though I saw Moshe Ayafrind in Mordeh Shmait says even a half hour in between is enough. But it seems an hour after milchiks, you could have fleishik without kinuach and adacha. Now, this is what I saw, and I think people are saimach on this, biyoidim uvalo yoidim. But the emes, I must tell you that the Shloah HaKadosh, what I mentioned earlier, says if you ate milk, you want to eat fleishiks, make sure you make kinuach adacha and wait an hour. He doesn't seem you can make your bimka in kinuach and adacha. And Chaim Kanievsky was asked, till when do you have to still make kinuach and adacha? Is there any sheer hour or so? He says, ein loy sheer. In other words, you can't make a hamisher bargain. If I eat right away, I have to make kinuach and adacha, like Gemara says. If I make an hour wait, which is based on a zoya, I could eliminate kinuach and adacha. Who gave you the right to do that? This in Karelitz in the Sefer, which is basically on rivers, but Amud Kuflan Hey, he says, how do you substitute a din Gemara for a chum of the zoya? Now this is to me more convincing, but if the Welt doesn't make kinuach adacha, we have to find some libud schus. At least we found some suggestion that maybe if you waited an hour, you could somehow be soymach, that's enough. Now, let me be clear. If you ate meat, abasa oidenu bein shineim, till how many hours? Till 6 hours. You can't make this hamish a business. But if you ate cheese only, it's only particles in the mouth, maybe an hour is enough. Lamaisa, I would add, if you're having chicken for lunch, so then you have another tatui mekel. Because midina gemar, after chicken, after cheese, you don't have to make kinuach and adach. But it's hard to think about that we have this common case, people go from milchiks to fleishiks without kinuach adach. A few hours later, the chayr more important than the chumrah is the ikkedidin. And now that we're zoicha to finish two parts of the sugya, the halachos, and then of course, the zoya. Now we come to part 3, which I found fascinating because there's a lot of confusion, misinformation, and lack of yediyas. But once you know a little bit of the basics, I think you'll see that it's all very simple. And let me clarify. People have this notion that when you have pizza or eggplant parmesan or lasagna, you have to wait 6 hours because these foods typically use what's called hard cheese. So the question is there such a base in halacha when you have hard cheese, you have to wait longer than if you have regular cheese or milk? In other words, is there a special din for hard cheese, and what is classified as hard cheese? So, to my very limited knowledge, there's no mention in the Gemara at all about hard cheese versus soft cheese. To my knowledge, the first mention is Mar Rutenberg in the Chuvas in Prague, Tov Reish Tezvav. If you don't have Mar Rutenberg, it's quoted verbatim, the Mordechai and Chulin Tov Reish Pei Zayin. And since it's packed with information, I'm going to try to read most of it. He writes about himself. This is the Mar Rutenberg, the Rebbe of the Rosh, father of the Tur, like the Zayd of the Shulchan Aruch, they call him affectionately. From the earliest Rishonim. He says, I heard people that wait to eat meat after cheese, and I used to make fun of them. because I think it's minus, apikorsis. You hear? From a person is an apikoris. Why is it an apikoris? Because the Gemara says, "V'loi klum," you don't have to wait. So why are you waiting? Are you smarter than the Gemara? So I felt it's apikorsis. Until once I ate cheese, then I ate meat, and I found when I was eating meat, there was still cheese in my mouth. So I was geyser, to be machmir, that to wait after cheese before eating meat. And he said, I'm not arguing on the Gemara, I'll do that. But the Gemara says in Chul and Kofei that my Rukva says my father waited 24 hours, I only wait Ben Suda to Suda. So you see there are different levels of Chumrah in Bas B'chalav. So that's my personal Chumrah. That's what he says. Now he goes from misloitzitz, making fun, and minus, to his minhag. But the problem is why? What's wrong? What's he worried about? You know what the answer is? I'll read his lashon. Matzasi gvina bein shinai. I found cheese between my teeth. Does that sound familiar? That's the Rambam. The Rambam that you have to wait after meat before cheese because bein hashinayim. So the Rambam saying when you have cheese, you also could have that problem. Now, Lamaisa, what he's saying is that maybe after cheese there's also a chashash bein hashinayim. Now, Lamaisa, this is not because of the Zoya's concern of Kabbalah. Because first of all, he says beferish, when I have chicken after cheese, I'm not worried. Just meat. The Zoya doesn't differentiate chicken or meat. And also, he doesn't mention the Zoya. But Rabbi said, here we come to an extremely important yediyah that's negated to the rest of the shir. And that is, it's not every cheese that requires waiting. It's what's called in the Paiskim Gevina kosher, or in English it's called hard cheese. Now let me explain. There's a reason why cheese is referred to as a brick of cheese. Because cheese, when it's processed, or ripened is the right word, it becomes very hard. Now Re'ezeh Pella, the Mishnah in Shabbos Kuf Chav Beis Amid Beis, says that you're allowed to use a kardam. A kardam is a hatchet. I don't want to tell you what you could do a hatchet with, but a hatchet is an extremely sharp and almost deadly instrument. You use a kardam to cut devela, igulei devela. So Rashi explains, why do you need a hatchet to cut devela? Because devela gets hard, v'kasha kegavina. It becomes as hard as cheese. So Rashi's mashal of a very brick, solid, hard food is cheese. Now here's the point that most of us probably never saw, but this is the fact. To make a long story short, just like we know that you take grape juice and you let it ferment, after the longer you keep it, the longer it ferments and has more alcohol. Well, there's a process similar to that in cheese. Regular cheese, if it's kept in the right climate, the right word, it ripens. That's the real term. But basically what it is when you keep cheese, and especially keep it in a cave, the rennet, the amol, it starts to get hard because the moisture seeps out, and that increases the flavor. So again, I'm using a poor mashal, but just like wine becomes more alcoholic, cheese becomes stronger. The moisture is evaporated, and it becomes a harder and stronger flavored piece of cheese. I'm not saying ferments, but it's the same idea. So Zok the Divrei Malkiel, and that's in Chelikei Mem Zayin, that's the problem Am Rutenberg had. Because when cheese became hard, it left bein shinayim. So we're back to square one. You have to wait like after meat. There's a second gadol that also was concerned about cheese, and that's the Issa V'het HaOruch, who was a Talmud of the Trumas Hadeshen, a few days after Am Rutenberg. But he said, when you have Gevina Yishan, old cheese, She'avru olav vav chadashim, in age at least 6 months, or any Gevina mitulas, even though there's no Issa midin Gemara, but since it's nidbak b'shinayim, you have to wait before you eat meat. And this is his shita. And then he adds, I have another problem. And that is, he writes, Midas Chasidis v'nochen l'chol bal nefesh, because since Lamaisa, the cheese aged, it got a stronger flavor, and therefore it's moishach tam. Those words sound familiar? That is the reason of Rashi, why you have to wait after meat, because meat is moishach tam. And the Issa V'heta is saying, a aged cheese has a stronger tam. and anybody who appreciates cheese knows this. The stronger the cheese, the stronger the flavor. So before we turn around, we just learned and realized that by a hard cheese could have both problems that meat has. Moishich tam and bein hashinayim. He does conclude there's no issa. And it's very pashut, because who said cheese had the same strong flavor like meat? And by meat is exeris akasa basai denu bein shineim. And who said it's as strong? But Lamaisa, these two Gedolei Olam were the ones that explained to us the halachos of a hard cheese. The third Gadol is a Taz in Yeridei Sif Cotton Dalit. He says there's no problem bein hashinayim, because even if it's hard, it doesn't stick like meaty, like stringy, meaty substances. But the problem is it's moishich tam, like gvina mitulas. So this is a very key word. You know, today we can't even believe this, but when they used to leave the cheese to ripen, it got so moldy that it started having worms, as in toilas. The worms are mutter because it evolved from the cheese. But that's how strong the flavor was. So the Taz says the reason to wait 6 hours is the strong flavor. Now, he says there's no problem bein hashinayim. The Ramah in two places, in Teras Chatos and Darkei Moshe, says there is a problem bein shinayim. And the Aruch HaShulchan in Sif Yud Aleph, he says, Lamoshel, Schweizer case, or Holland case, Holland cheese, or Swiss cheese, they have both problems. He says, Chalila, to say there's no problem. So here we have this idea of hard cheese, which is hard physically and has a strong taste. Now, here you wonder why it's not in the Gemara. I also wonder that. The Gemara maybe is talking only about soft cheese. I don't know. But Lamaisa in the Machaba makes no mention of hard cheese. And the Ramah has a very wavery lashon. V'yesh b'chein hagin shekol she'agvina kosher ein oich achre afilu basa oif k'may gvina acha basa. He's saying it's like cheese after meat. V'yesh makilim v'ein limchos, don't be moicha, and just make nuach nadacha miu toiv lahachma. So this is the sugi, Rabbi says, or Moshe writes in Yeridei Beis Chavav that the chumrah, that hard cheese is a chumrah. No one can say it's asa midina gemara. It's mentioned in the Ramah. The Ramah Taka says to do it. But Lamaisa, what's shocking is the Marshal, Yamsha Shloima, says you're not allowed to be machme after hard cheese. It's minus. He goes with the Marmutenberg's first thought. So the Shach says, no, minus it's not, because the Rishonim speak about it. But I hope it's clear that hard cheese has in a certain sense, is a midin ha-shulchan aruch. In a certain sense, is more chomer than the zoya, because hard cheese is in rishonim and could be like meat. Zoya is kol kule al pisoid. Mitzad sheni, zoya is more chomer, because zoya asks even oif and even soft cheese. So it's really two different categories. The zoya is al pisoid, including any cheese. But the chumrah of the Rishonim and Ramah is hard cheese, dafka, and not soft cheese. Now, what is considered hard cheese? So let me tell you. I have a list. If anybody needs, I can tell you probably any cheese. I have a list of the OU put out of exactly the metzias in. But basically, the Issa V'Heta said that hard cheese means it was aged 6 months. And the assumption is the longer it sits, the more flavorful it gets and the harder it gets. But what's clear is mozzarella cheese is the baby cheese. It's aged all of 30 days. That's a very fancy name, but that's it. No shaykh is the hard cheese. Munster cheese is 5 to 7 weeks. Mild cheddar is 2 to 3 months, so none of them you have to wait. Li'idach gisa, more pashut I should say, American cheese is no shayla. American cheese is mamish made from the scraps of the shredded, the cheddar cheese. It's mamish very young in its age, no shayla, you don't have to wait. What you do have to wait the holidays is Parmesan, 10 to 24 months. Sharp cheddar cheese I call ziknei hagavinois. Could be up to 7 years old. Can you imagine how many worms could be in that cheddar cheese? But sharp cheddar as opposed to the mild cheddar cheese. And authentic Swiss cheese and its varieties, the age varies from the cheese. Now the point you have to realize is, and this is a klal, American-made cheese, not American-made cheese is part of the American mentality of quick, instant, ready to go, fast food. They make the cheese taste like aged, but it's not aged. I'll give you an example. pepper jack in a foreign market you need to wait 6 hours because it's aged 6 months plus. But the American market of pepper jack is aged 2 months. So gei versteh. In the world we live, everything is quick. And the truth is, if you have to age it the way you used to age it, keep it, it costs in processing, and there's a potential loss of revenue. You can't make money for 7 years or 6 months, whatever it is. So there's a very big Yetzirah to expedite the process. So what's the Eitzah? Very simple. Look at the packaging. Now someone came to me a little upset. He had a Hamish Parmesan cheese, and it doesn't say you have to wait 6 hours. I said, but look again. It says age 10 months. So I said, does it say on your Hamish Shechita by this and this rub, and don't eat cheese after the meat? Does it say that? So why does it have to say after cheese? It says age 10 months. So you have to be an educated consumer and look at the packaging. It says aged 10 months, 12 months, whatever it says, you have to wait 6 hours, just like the Ramah says. Now, I'll give you just a few examples of how you have to know a little metzias. Eggplant parmesan is a very popular food in yeshivas, in camps, and in homes. So if you're not familiar, you might think parmesan is like souffle. Parmesan is a cheese, right? It's a cheese, pasha. So that sounds like you have to wait 6 hours. But then again, at least in yeshiva and camp, probably almost always, they don't use the real parmesan. It's too expensive. They use mozzarella, which is probably, I don't know, maven, but might have the same taste and much less expensive. So there's no reason to wait. But if you use parmesan, and it's interesting, they sell shredded parmesan for a reason. Because you can't slice the real McCoy parmesan because it's too hard. You need a hatchet. So if you have you take your eyes, look at the packaging and see. Now, if you have a suffix, if it's a Gvina Kasha, so up to the Das Kadosh, the Bajana Rav, the B'chacha Rav, and the Kavachayim, Memches quotes it, it's a suffix in a Drabanan. It's a suffix in a suffix Drabanan, because some hold, you don't have to be Chayshes, but at most it's a suffix Drabanan. Now, someone said he bought American cheese a long time ago, put it in the fridge, and he kept it for more than 6 months. I said, okay, so when it gets a year old, you make a birthday, but you don't have to wait 6 hours. It doesn't change the processing. Once it's processed, it's finished. Shulchan Alevi and Chavav, Aleph says people ask this question, it has no mocker whatsoever. Now, there are some cheeses you have to know that could age. Like someone told me he was in Australia and he bought a regular cheese that they sell. It wasn't American cheese, maybe Australian cheese. And as the time went on, he tasted it became stronger and stronger. Now that's a metzias. If they didn't do anything in the processing to stop its fermentation, quote unquote, it could taka become stronger. But Lamaisa, our American cheese, you don't have to worry about at all. A few more points I wanted to mention. I'll give you a little bit of heads up, like they say. The Gedolei Poskim in Eretz discuss what's called Gevina Tzuhuva, and some are chayish to wait 6 hours, and some don't. Gevina Tzuhuva, we like to think, is American cheese, which used to be Tzuhuva, which is yellow. That's not Gevina Tzuhuva. Gevina Tzuhuva in Eretz is a type of cheese, different types of cheese, but basically where they make the sharp flavor without aging at 6 months. So they have this patent to make it have a flavor of a sharp cheese, but it was not aged. So that's why you'll find some hold you have to wait, some you don't wait, but Zicha, American cheese that we have, is not a shayla. The real Parmesan, you have to wait 6 hours. Now, someone once had the shayla, he made pizza, lasagna, or eggplant Parmesan, but he said he heard that since it was cooked, you don't have to wait 6 hours. That's real McCoy Parmesan, you have to wait. If it's cooked, it might be different. Is that true? So I told him it's true and it's not true, and I'll explain. The Yad Yehuda, one of the big poskim in Yeridei, and Kotzes Hivkat Lamed, says narrowly that if you have Gevina Kasha, real, authentic Gevina Kasha, that was cooked, you don't have to wait 6 hours. Now, where's he coming from? I'll tell you what. Because he holds the ikka reason to wait 6 hours for Gevina Kasha is because it's hard, like a brick. So once you cooked it and now it's soft, you don't have to wait 6 hours. But this is not the poskim real opinion, most poskim. They asked Rabbi Yashiv in Kaivis Chuvas Aleph Nun Ches, is it true that you, the Rav, said that after pizza, you don't have to wait 6 hours because the cheese is cooked? He said, I never said that. If I cared, he said, because that makes sense if the only reason to wait 6 hours is because it's hard. So on pizza, it's soft, you don't have to wait 6 hours. But since one of the reasons independently is Moishech Tam, that doesn't change. And the Badi HaShulchan in Berurim Siman Beis says the same thing. In fact, the Ben Ish Chai said beferish, so that's why Lamaisa, that's not a tzad to be makel unless you hold the only reason is Gevina Kosher. But Lamaisa, what I told this person that asked me this child originally, he ate cheddar, he ate real McCoy, Parmesan cheese, Erev Yom Tov, and now he has Makam Chvetz Kvayda Brias. Is there any tzad to be makel and have meat afterwards? So we have a few svaras. First of all, some hold no issa. If it's a suffix, if it's Gevina Kosher, hopefully it was, I mean it was, but I don't think it was. But if it's a suffix, if it's Gevina Tzuhuva, Lamashal, could be makel. If he could suffice with chicken, we have many shittas. The Yamsha Shloimeh says it's minus. So basically, if you wait an hour, is another tzad to be makel, because some hold, even after meat an hour is enough. I would say, Chacham Ein B'Roishay, don't do such things. Don't have pizza done before Erev Yom Tov, before this man, not supposed to have that. But if a person had real Gevina Kosher, the minhag Yisrael is to wait 6 hours, like after meat. I couldn't talk to you.
Shkoya, B'Shem English I'd like to thank our listeners for the wonderful shir. Rabbi says, "Kim to the Heilige Yom Tov Purim." We all need simcha to mashpia simcha, but the Kolbei rise, the Ikar simcha is to fill up yourself with simcha, to be able to be with Sameach, other Yidden. Hundreds of families need matanas lav yoinim. Please give today. Everybody can make it to the credit card, write a check to Congregation Bisan to help out hundreds of families that need some matanas lav yoinim. Tiska mitzvahs. Also, again, remind them the Lvov campaign. They're bombing now in Lvov, and we need thousands of portions of food to bring them and those to save hundreds of mishpachas. Please write for that a check too on a credit card. Tiskra mitzvahs, ne'ev shalva alzama, freilich and purim, na gut gebent shior. Mecham lekashem meretz gosh bach lezaka, es is Yisrael, es ikich hibelem tev mitzvah, shem ad nechofes man tzidke Yakov tev yadim.